everybody. I'm Mike Vizard. We've got a DevSecOps paradox, some patch management progress, and maybe a conversation about cloud computing alternatives, whether they're gaining traction or not. You're watching Techstrong, gang. We'll be back in a minute. All right, everybody, welcome back. Let me introduce today's guests. We have, of course, Mitch Ashley joins us once again from high up in the Rocky Mountains of Colorado. Mitch, good to see you. All right. In a slightly lower climate, maybe, or, cold but desert climate. I'm not entirely sure, but Tracy Ragan, welcome back.
Oh, thank you. And we're actually at a higher level than Mitch. I know not everybody knows that New Mexico's at a higher level than Colorado, but some parts are, and we are.
All right. Not that it's a contest, but there you go. All right. And then Guy Currier, I assume you're in Texas today still?
Yep. Got to spend all last week back home in Austin. May have to jet off to California this week, but so far looking good for staying in Austin all week. Cold Austin. I don't know if you know, we've got this big freeze coming with snow and everything coming through just today.
Nice. Well, I'm in New York, and they're actually saying we might get some snow this weekend. So I'm like looking around in the garage going, do we have a shovel? And how much ice do I have? But all those things that you guys probably have already dealt with. Anyway, let's jump into this first topic because there's been a post this week, I guess a report from Black Duck talking about the progress that's being made in DevSecOps. And on the upside, it says, well, there's more usage of software composition analysis tools, and we're actually seeing people actually generate some of these SBOMs that we've been talking about, otherwise known as software bill of materials. But at the same time, training of folks on cybersecurity, especially developers, is now at an all-time low. They've been tracking this thing for 15 years now. So, Mitch, there's a bit of a paradox in all of this. Is this mean shift left is dying, or what's going on here?
Well, it's kind of two parts of a general topic of software security, but they aren't the same thing. I think the rise on software composition analysis, SBOMs, is driven by a lot of things. One of them is regulatory front, especially in Europe, because there's some in effect actions and more things coming that require SBOMs. And also software, I call it decomposition analysis because that's kind of what it is to me, like decompose this, right? So, those tools are on the rise, and those are looking at all the software that we're building, right? Not just what one developer or each individual developer contributes. So that's actually a really good thing. Why is training going down for individual developers? I'm not sure why. I've always been plus and minus on training because it's a good thing to do, but if you just do it once a year and it kind of becomes this rote thing, then everybody sort of blows it off and forgets everything after a week anyway. Sorry, nothing against developers, but I think most people do that when it becomes, we've got to do our whatever certification training each year. So, so much of the world that the developer lives in is in their IDE and increasingly in copilots that are part of that environment. That's where the real security happens in terms of what developers are doing on a day-to-day basis. So they're kind of two parts of a bigger picture.
Tracy, what's your take on this? Do developers just don't want no stinking training because they're basically in the hands-on in the code, and if something comes up, they want the IDE to tell them about it while it's relevant to them?
I think that there's that. There's always the cultural stuff. If you can hand it to me, please just hand it to me and don't make me work. But the other thing to remember is that there is a limited amount of money spent on training. Limited. I think most budgets maybe give each developer, one class a year, something of that sort, which they get to choose. Now, if I'm in that boat, I'm not going to choose cybersecurity as my thing to learn. I'm going to be doing something around AI because that's where I'm going to get paid more, right? So there's problems in training being the one road to safety. because not every developer is going to sign up for those cybersecurity classes. Unless, of course, for some reason it's forced and it comes from the top and the entire organization has a goal to be completely trained. So there's that. But on the other side, I just have to point this out. Vulnerabilities are dynamic. They happen all the time. SBOMs and static composition analysis is exactly that. You can do a really great job of finding vulnerabilities when you go to create your container and clean it all up. You get the deployment done and freaking tomorrow there's a vulnerability. So we have to stop thinking in a way of in a static kind of world that just doesn't work anymore. And SBOMs are fabulous. But as a blog I wrote about 2 years ago with Vincent Dannon from Red Hat, we titled it SBOMs, so far so good, so what? You know, because it just becomes a text file that's checked into Git and we're not using it. So we have a long road to go. We really do. And I believe it's squarely in the hands of the DevOps engineers, and trying to train developers in cybersecurity is a good idea. I'm not saying it's not. And Linux Foundation has a free course if you want to take it, but it's not the sole road. Or it's I don't even think it's a 20% a student solving the problem. And we're going to get tooling that's better, that we don't have to have developers. We're going to squiggly line problems when we start coding them. So, this is going to get solved in a different way from the developer side.
We have to
We've
think
had
of
a few
software security as a continuous process. It's like continuous integration, continuous deployment. It's got to be continuous software composition analysis, continuous.
We call it
SBOM.
continuous vulnerability management.
Exactly. That's
Got to
the
continually
model.
be on it. Yeah.
Otherwise, we're making the same kind of way we used to do security in networks of, I got my firewall, I got my gateway, I got et cetera. It's not a point in time thing. Guy, I stepped on you. Apologize.
Well, I've just been wondering, particularly lately, and this is bringing it to a point, has DevOps sort of as a culture or an industry, or even developers, ever been punished for going too fast? Because I feel like a lot of the shift left or code analysis, or other forms of prevention or remediation of these things, a big reason that they are not adopted and used, and training as well, is it slows things down. And I've seen research to
Well,
support this sort of thing, that it's a
the
big
DevOps
issue.
pipeline slows things down.
There's a lot of things that slow things down, but the sort of thing like a security or vulnerability or whatever that has never hit you and your team particularly, and that you don't know when it will hit, that's that amorphous thing that you want to try to
Right.
at least be able to hit. I mean, Tracy, I think one of your big points lately has been, and I think you just made it, embrace the fact that this is going to happen, build processes and systems around it and culture in order to address it.
Right.
I think that, and we had a discussion about this at the Predict event last week, where that's the embrace it side of things, be prepared for it, continue to be able to release and drive value and all of that sort of thing at speed. But the other one is remediation, which Mike, I feel like that is how you framed up the whole question. How do we make sure that this happens less often? With training, with tools, and that sort of thing. I just feel like all the incentives are more on the just keep barreling forward side and deal with it when it happens.
I say, where's Ralph Nader when you need him, right? We need the republished Unsafe at Any Speed, but instead about cars, maybe it's about software development. I don't know. But
You're the remediation camp.
I'm unclear about this. I think you can go fast, but you have to be smart. And if you're using smaller pieces of code that you're working with, you should be able to make that more secure and higher quality as you go along without compromising speed. I think we just don't necessarily do things as smart as we should. But Tracy, what's your thought?
Well, we have a lot of SBOMs. right? If we're in a decoupled environment, every time we create a container, we have a new SBOM. And there's different kinds of SBOMs, right? There's code level SBOMs and there's the container SBOM itself. And then we have, literally with APIs and microservices, we have hundreds of them that make up an application. So, and you could have a vulnerability with a vulnerability version of a package in a container or in multiple containers, and different containers have different versions of that particular package. So we have this dependency, this giant, I like to call it a Death Star because that's what it reminds me of. This giant Death Star of dependencies and the lines that are drawn between them make it really, really difficult to manage this stuff. And when we create SBOMs, which I am totally for, you have to have an SBOM. I'm just saying that. But we have to consume the data. We have to consume and use the data in order to make it continuous. It's the only way to move forward. And I think that DevOps, we've got a lot of work yet to do in the DevOps area. And to touch a workflow is the last thing that teams want to do. They don't want to add a lot of tooling. They don't want to go and muck around with those workflows because they're complicated themselves. So we have a problem. We have statically coded workflows. We have static code analysis and static SBOMs, and we feel good about generating them. We check mark it, and 3 days later, we have a severe or a high-risk vulnerability we have to address.
Yeah, they're already out of date, is your point.
So,
And
if the SBOM is out of date by the time it's generated, I don't know, Mitch, is this thing, kind of the software development of a binky pacifier that I'm just giving people to suck on, but it doesn't really mean anything?
It can be a feel-good moment, right? Oh, we did an SBOM. Now, what do you do with it? To Tracy's point as well. I haven't given this talk in a while, but I used to give a talk about software and software security are not a solid. They're fluids. They are constantly changing. I mean, it is actively being worked on all the time. Even if you think it's the weekend and it's midnight on Saturday or 1 a.m., somebody's probably in there dinking around and trying something because they were up playing around. Or maybe you're working around the sun, or there's a new software package that gets updated that's going to go into the next build. It is a continuous flow of change. And so doing software composition analysis, doing an SBOM, those are good, but they're point in time. They have to be a continuous process. Now, when do you ship the FBOM with the code? Probably when it goes into production or goes to a customer. You want to be able to know what was built in the software build that goes into a test environment or into production. But I think that's the way we've got to think about it. And to your point, Tracy, static workflows, and I totally agree. It's the fear of death to go in and change a workflow in a CI/CD pipeline because you easily break things, or if there's something broken and trying to fix it, it takes pretty smart DevOps engineer to do that. So we can't have such brittle workflows, such brittle pipelines. They have to be able to be changed on a continual basis. Not every second, but it can't be something we don't touch because we're afraid we're going to break it.
So we just saw that the DORA regulations from the EU went into effect. Tracy, do you think that we're going to see a lot of people adding SBOMs and SCA tools, but to what end exactly? Just to check a box?
I don't know. I think that those become guidelines, and unless they're being asked for very specific reporting, it's going to be hard to enforce that. Uh, I think that teams should be thinking in this way with adding SBOMs, for example. But it's like my example I always use. I live on a dirt road and it's got a sign that says 20 miles an hour, but who's enforcing that? So I drive 40. I don't get tickets from my neighbor. Maybe, I don't know. He'll have to, put up some tickets. Would I respond? No. So, the accountability isn't there yet. And in these modern architectures with so many SBOMs, which SBOM are we talking about? Most teams can't generate an application level SBOM. They're going to hand off 25 or 200 SBOMs. And a lot of the information's redundant and it's ugly and gory. Those SBOMs are really gory. They're just a spew of text information. So yeah, maybe they'll generate them, but to what end? What's the point? And that's I love talking about this because I've thought about it for quite some time. And at Deploy Hub, we're trying to solve some of these issues. But are we going to see a huge rise in SBOM generation? We'll see, right? I think some people will include it, but to what end?
I think we will. In some places, it's called out, not necessarily in DORA. DORA has kind of, by the way, DORA only applies to financial institutions, credit institutions, things like that. So it isn't universally applicable, but there's a Cybersecurity Act in the EU. There's also a NIST2, NIS2, not NIST. So there are a number of kind of regulations that you either have or are impending, in effect, impacts of. Now, we're doing what they described. There is like U.S. law, right? Here's the law, but now you got to interpret, well, what does that mean? How do you put it into effect, and then how do you enforce it? So there's a lot to be left to figure it out on this, but it is becoming a requirement and becoming, at least I think, close to a boardroom conversation of what are we going to do to comply with this? Because some of the fines are really, I mean, they're extremely high, especially if you look at the software liability changes in Europe, where it's a percentage of your revenue. It could be substantial. Now, where people are going to get fined for that, and how much litigation is there going to be, et cetera, et cetera. But nobody wants to be the poster child for the first company to go through that.
And I want to
These
say
regulations like DORA seem to be an attempt to force the remediation side of things. It's like taking away the punch bowl type stuff, right? Make sure that you are being a little bit more cautious and understanding and forcing you into changing a workflow or shifting left or what have you. But I think that there's a real point to be made around understanding that none of this, however compliant you are, is really going to prevent everything. Even recognizing the static nature of the SBOM or any other documentation, and trying to fix it. Nothing gets fully fixed. It just doesn't.
All right,
And
Tracy.
I think that I think DORA metrics are a bit long in the tooth too. They were built around monolithic and legacy code development.
All right. So,
And the way we build code now is very different. It really is.
so Tracy, if we have a lot of ugly SBOM data, is this not an opportunity to build an AI agent that's going to like sort all this stuff for us? And maybe that's how we get to continuous?
Oh, Ortelius already did it. So if this is something you really are interested in, the Ortelius project's incubating at the Linux Foundation. We consume the SBOM, and then we aggregate it up to the application level, so you can actually generate an application level SBOM. And then we constantly scan OSV dev with the SBOM data that we normalize, by the way, because you don't want so much data, to show on a regular basis the vulnerabilities that are hitting the system long after the deployment's done. And we're not sticking agents, because everybody knows I don't like agents, out in production environments to open up your container and scan it at that point, because that's just over-engineered. The DevOps pipeline has all the answers. We are generating all the information we need, including where a package is running in a particular container in a particular environment. We're just not consuming that data. We just leave it out fragmented with lots of logs. We maybe check it into Git, but it's not useful there. So I say, hey, if you guys want to solve this problem, Ortelius.io, come and join the open source project and help us finish it.
Definitely, Ortelius is a great open source option. There's commercial tools available. Folks like Sonatype do some things in this area. We're talking about kind of a later part of the process in the workflow, in the pipeline. There's also great companies, folks like ChainGuard and Cloudsmith, who are helping you groom and contain what goes into your pipeline, so you're having less problems with, maybe you filter out the vulnerabilities that might be present there. And being cautious about how you select software that's part of your builds, et cetera. So it's a holistic solution. And yes, we've got to have much better ways, management systems for SBOMs, part of the solution, but we've got to fix it coming in, or else those SBOMs get really even worse.
Well, folks, it sounds like we have the tools. We just may not have the will to kind of put them in place just yet, but we're getting there. And I feel like there's some progress being made, but we'll see what the year brings. We're going to move on to our next topic. We'll be back in a minute.
Modernize your business to fuel innovation and elevate customer experiences. With the Builder Community Hub, AWS and its partner network provide essential tools for transforming applications and infrastructure to fully leverage the cloud. Discover free trials, in-depth demos, and essential resources to empower DevOps engineers and developers to deliver value faster and more reliably. Visit the Builder Community Hub to learn more.
Hey, folks, we're back, and we're going to have a little chat that's related to the first chat. We're going to talk about patch management in the sense of there's a new report out from Aptiva, and they are talking about how, well, it still takes more than a week or so to apply a patch, but that could be progress in some regards. And one of the things that they were noting is that IT teams, just the average IT service management team, is automating a lot of this process and doing it on their own. They're not standing around waiting for someone to tell them it's okay to patch that thing because, well, it turns out that the cybersecurity threat is often more expensive than actually taking down the application if something goes wrong. Tracy, I know you've been following this space, but are we evolving our thinking about patch management here?
I am so glad that people are starting to talk about the issues around patching vulnerabilities. Now, people get confused. When you're talking about a remediation, it means, okay, we found a vulnerability. It's a severe 0-day vulnerability. The open source team gets the fix out. Okay, great. Again, SBOMs. So far, so good. So what? We have a remediation. Now what we have to do is be able to get that deployed. And it means that you have to have a very clear understanding of where that vulnerability is running in your environment, which container, and it's not just the package, it's the package version. And so what we see are teams going, okay, we don't know who's using what, we need to redeploy 50% of our code to fix this. It's a shotgun approach. Again, we have to have the insights, we have to have the SBOM, we have to have the packages, and we have to start mapping those packages to where they're deployed in order to make the patching as efficient as possible. At one point, I think JFrog said that it takes about 227 days to resolve a single vulnerability across the globe, right? So you get a 0-day vulnerability, and it's going to take about a year before it all goes away. We were on a webinar with the Sonatype folks, and they said there are still people downloading the vulnerable version of Log4j because it's in a script someplace, and they don't know it. So much of what we're struggling with, in particular in patch management, is the lack of a full view, a comprehensive, sweeping view of where packages are running in all of our environments, not just production. And once we have that, the DevOps pipeline should be able to push those fixes out far more efficiently than we're doing it today. But as I explained in the last block, we have the data, we don't do anything with it. So this has been a complaint for me for a long time. We talk about AI, we talk about applying DevOps, AI to DevOps, but you got to have the data. And most of the data that we have is fragmented and checked into static log files in Git. And we have to get it out. We have to pull that information to a central evidence store in order to start being smart and applying any kind of AI to it. Or just be able to do our standard DevOps practice to get something out, but we have to know where to put it. And knowing where to put it is the biggest challenge that companies have. So I think that article was spot on, and I'm not surprised at all.
I do want to say one thing about that study and article, which also we discussed actually last week at Predict, which is the majority of organizations are automating patch management for at least one application or one. That's the thing. It's worth remembering that they have automation, and that's a good step forward. But it doesn't mean that more than one application is being or environment is being automated in that way. So I would say that if we had that data, which the survey did not test for, we might find less than 10%, maybe less than 5% of applications are actually being automated in this way. And we also don't know the degree of automation that we're talking about. So it's encouraging, I agree, but I put that healthy dose of salt into it, especially since the general report was that there's like 64% or something like that of organizations say that they are not coordinated at all in either detecting or remediating the response, and that's what causes delays of a week for it even to begin a patch, automated or not.
So, Mitch, I mean, Tracy kind of alluded to we can push out the patch through our DevOps pipelines, and yet a lot of the patching is still done by traditional IT admins and those types of folks. Do we have a disconnect in the system here between all our DevOps stuff and what the ITSM people are doing? And is this where it manifests itself?
There definitely can be, bifurcated, 3 different paths into getting into production. It argues for the trend that we see, which is in some form, platform engineering, DevOps, system administration, IT ops, parts of that are coming together. And whether it's all living in a platform engineering group or whatever it is, a lot of those functions are the same because platform engineering people are starting to do or have been doing DevOps tool management and pipeline management. That's been shifted as part of their responsibility. Or maybe they're working closely with the DevOps people, engineers, to do that work. Same thing for patching in the platforms they're providing to those environments and keeping those up to date, et cetera. But oftentimes that's an in production kind of thing versus what we provide to deploy into production. So it's a little bit of a convoluted multiple paths. And I think that's often where the confusion happens is who's patching this? Who is it? Well, I'm not going to patch it because that's their responsibility. And organizations recognize that. And they've got to kind of get their act together and decide what's their process, who's going to do it. It doesn't necessarily matter which team, but it needs to be done and there has to be a process so we all know what's been validated before it goes in and that it's been applied.
Guy, do you think people are just, calculating some odds here and it's essentially gambling and they're trying to figure out, what is the cost of, if I patch this thing, how much trouble I might get in because I broke it versus what's the probability that some vulnerability will be exploited? So are we all kind of playing, some version of Russian roulette here?
Oh, I definitely think that's the case. I do think there's more awareness. And as you know, sort of one of my predictions for this year is that this will become more conscious Russian roulette rather than essentially, unconscious or subconscious Russian roulette. I think that there's politics and culture that plays into this so much, going along to getting along, going along to get along, whatever it may be. And I think that there is this huddle or what I picked up from someone else sort of called kiddie soccer element. Something's happening. Oh my God, we're all going to get together and talk about it. We're going to figure out who's going to do what. We're going to reassure each other, point the finger at some, like all that sort of stuff that goes on. It's just social and cultural instead of a real cold, hard look at what's going on and addressing it in a systematic way. I think things are getting better, but it's like going from bad to not so bad. That's sort of how I feel about it.
I don't know. Last time I watched
And
kitty soccer, it was 10 kids running around after the ball with no particular play.
That's what kiddie soccer is. Everybody goes where the ball is instead of people playing their positions.
All right.
And I want to point out too that not every vulnerability is the same. And when you and not
Again,
every
yes.
system is treated the same. So how many companies actually have a Jenkins workflow for the operating system, right? Or any kind of COTS that they may have that they may be integrating with. And so there are teams that are highly regulated. Let's just say the application teams that have they've got a Jenkins workflow. They're really trying to automate. They're really trying to create the visibility. And then you have the software that just gets installed by somebody on the ops side. And oftentimes there's a mismatch in how that a release to an operating system level could impact multiple applications, and they will never know. And it's the same with in a decoupled environment. you might be consuming the standard logging routine, right? And they make a patch because they found a vulnerability, so they push a patch out. And now you're getting errors every time that your system goes to do the logging, and you don't know why. You have no clue. You have no insights of what's happened. So we're in a new world now. We've got people still going through digital transformation and trying to modernize applications. We have cybersecurity on our tail, and everybody says we should be writing AI applications. What is it that we should be doing first? In my opinion, cybersecurity is very, very important, and we've got to get our DevOps practice back online and start understanding how all these pieces are interconnected, and they all should have similar requirements for moving to production.
Yeah.
You and I have talked about that, Tracy, that there may be a certain level of shoring up to be done in DevOps right around now. That was your insight to me. I don't want to take any credit for it, but it really resonates. And I feel like that is, something that might actually start to be recognized now. And that is encouraging.
Well, I hope it is, because CD events at the Linux Foundation, it's one of my favorite open source projects there, and we have not seen any of the what I like to call the giants. IBM is actually pushing it; they've got a developer on it, but none of the rest of the giants have really started to look at it. And if we could get rid of plugins, really, or even command line, and start driving DevOps through event processing, we wouldn't be talking about the fact that we have brittle, pipelines that we don't want to touch. We don't even want to go in there and add a workflow, add a step to generate an SBOM, which is very easy, everybody. It's super easy, but we don't want to touch it.
So
So
you're
let's hope
saying
that
we need to modernize DevOps, not just our applications.
we need to modernize DevOps. Something fierce
there we
right
go.
now.
There we
Yes,
go.
we do.
Right. And Guy, you kind of alluded to this a little bit, but I want to get into it a little bit more. So people say they've automated patch management. Well, I think they've automated the deployment of the patch, but when something goes wrong, it's not automated on the return. So it, winds up being a manual kind of thing at the end of the day. So maybe that's why I'm scared to patch.
Yeah. So automation is app dev. It has a life cycle of its own. It should have creation, test, promotion, and so forth. I don't want to overdo it, but what we're more or less talking about is a certain thoughtfulness that should go into all of this that is lacking, not because these people aren't thoughtful people, but because the incentives, both from the culture and from the business or the organization they're in, can often be at odds with it. And that's all. That's all. So yeah, exactly. It's not how many organizations, it's how many organizations, to what degree, and at what depth are they automating patch management. Those are the three elements of it that tells us whether we're really making progress or not.
And we know developers love spending their time patching software.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Well, so now, right? I'll bring up the elephant in every room. So now there are ways to use AI to help with that, right? And we also know that it is not just an answer. It gives you more assurance to do because it's less of a burden. A developer can have a little more fun or a little less pain doing it with an AI service of some kind. But then they still need to validate that it works, that it's correct, that it wasn't done improperly, that human intervention. So it's an easier button, not an easy button. So it can create a whole new level of problems with the automation to use AI. So
Tracy, do you think AI is going to force this issue in an ugly way? And I'll describe the ugly way. It seems like the bad guys are figuring out how to use AI to scan for vulnerabilities and then generate a piece of code or something to exploit that vulnerability using that AI tool. And there's just going to be a boatload more of these 0-day vulnerabilities as a result. And you're going to get about no notice, and you're going to be expected to fix this issue in 24 hours or less. Is that where we're headed?
I'm banking on it. I am banking on it. I spend every single day as working on a startup to solve this exact problem, because I do believe it will be a primary issue. But let's just face it, the complexity in modern applications is way too broad for a human to sort out. We have to, and we don't really need AI to fix this problem. We really don't. We have the data. We have the technology that can fix this problem. We just need to make a commitment to doing it. We just need to create an understanding that while we might have a great, a single great workflow for one container, when it comes to putting a patch across hundreds of containers, it's a whole different environment because you have to understand the impact of making that patch. What is my favorite word? The blast radius. Everybody
Where's
get
our
all
drink?
happy.
That was a tradition on one show. Take a step.
If you don't understand the blast radius, then you're going to make the patches, but you may not be able to complete it because you don't know all the locations where it needed to go. And you may patch things that didn't need being patched. So this is a very broad problem. We can't expect humans in operations or DevOps engineers or developers to try to fix it. It's too big. We need better visibility, and we need better understanding of what the impact is of a single fix and where we need to put it.
Which leads to our second favorite term, unintended consequences. And by updating stuff that didn't need it.
It didn't need it, yeah.
So,
And the time it took to do that.
so Mitch, I mean, we keep circling around this particular issue, but is it just a matter of will and a lack of will in these organizations? Because we seem to have tools and capabilities, but we're not willing to go the extra mile. And is it because we're afraid of the pipeline, or is there something else at work here?
Well, when we're incented to get features and capabilities out, right? That's what the business needs, and that's what we want to be able to deliver on strategies, business goals, customer experience, et cetera. So that's, for developers, that's where their kind of bread and butter is. So the more time we consume from developers of doing patches, that's the toil part of it, right? That's that technical backlog. I think the issue is you're afraid to touch. You're afraid to touch it because if you break something, you bought it. You get to fix it, right? Kind of to Tracy's point about patch could go a lot of places. Where do we deploy it? And who's making the call about how important it is? Coordinating with security or using whatever tool that you use to assess, its severity against where do we use it and how do we use it, and does that functionality that even can be exposed. So for a security patch, so it's not as simple as kind of upgrading your iPhone and saying, "Yep, go ahead and update all those applications." I wish it was, but it is I think it is a good application for AI to apply specific kinds of patches. I wouldn't turn ChatGPT to go apply all my patches, but I think as we have specialized upgrading operating systems, upgrading part of your stack, upgrading Kubernetes, things like that involve, getting really into some of the meat of what's going on in the app. And does this patch depend on an Okta update or vulnerability that you need to get patched? And if so, what are the implications? That's where we can help it, because we're seeing AI start to help us analyzing code bases for doing application modernization. What is the architecture? What's the functionality? How does this work? So I think there are some tools that are really going to help us bring down the fear factor.
All right, folks. I think ultimately, to Mitch's point, they say compensation drives behavior, and developers may not like to do patching, but if we change the way we compensate them to focus more on, ensuring the quality of the applications and developing patches, guess what they're going to do? Hey, folks, we'll be back in a minute with our next topic, but stay tuned.
Discover Techstrong Group, the epicenter of tech innovation. We're your go-to for reaching IT leaders and practitioners worldwide. Our secret? Impactful content that sparks awareness, engagement, and top-quality leads. With us, you'll access editorial websites, streaming videos, virtual events, custom content, analyst research, and more. Join our satisfied clients. Let's revolutionize your tech journey. Contact us today and tell your story to the world in the most powerful way with Techstrong Group.
All right, folks, we're back and we're talking about cloud computing. And this is one of those topics that I got to say always leaves me scratching my head. And the issue is, and I'm going to start with Guy, we all know there's the top three cloud service providers, the hyperscalers, and then there's, maybe the next tier underneath that, and a couple of Chinese companies. And then there's this other category. And there's like 10 times, maybe even 20 times more companies in that other category. And I feel like a lot of the services that we're using in the cloud are commodities at this point. 80% of it probably is using the same kind of basic infrastructure stack. So why aren't we seeing more folks kind of use alternative cloud service providers? And last week we saw LeaseWeb, for example, come out with an aggressively priced set of services based on the latest generation of AMD processors. They got NVMe storage. They got 10 gig networks. So what's going on here?
Well, clearly a vendor is producing something at a price point because they see an opportunity for that. I scratch my head and say, how is this different? What about this is different than 10 years ago? Because we had these 10 years ago. We had bare metal as a service 10 years ago. And I also asked myself, and I didn't do the research, so maybe it's readily available, but what stack or stacks are offered and how are they managed? It really comes down to deficiencies or immaturity in management, in operations, and in platform. So I'm going to go and use this virtual private server from LeaseWeb. Great. It's cheap, €4 a month. Let's say I have my choice of stack, it's LAMP, it's Linux, it's Windows, whatever it is, good. All that's good. And if what I'm trying to do is house one web app or one particular database or app or what have you, where the siloed nature of it is not a big deal, and these apps exist in every organization of almost every size, great. But what we are really trying to drive towards is mobile apps, scalability up and out, and an ability to manage in a relatively simple way. The proverbial pane of glass, I think, is mostly a myth, but you do want to have a relatively simple way to look at your estate and know what's happening in various servers and in various points wherever they are housed. I don't really see we're getting there. We're starting to get there. We're starting to get to, so mobility is, I have a single unified there may be multiple Kubernetes implementations out there, but I can manage them all, at least in one paradigm, if not literally in one pane of glass, and I can move things around. This is really important for the app lifecycle because there are things I may want to trial that I want to trial in a public cloud, but then I want to have a more controlled environment, which could be this LeaseWeb environment. And then when it gets into production and audit and all those other sort of things that I need to do, then I have, whether it's a private cloud provided by one of the hyperscalers, or that may not be appropriate. There's lots of options out there, but many of these processes of initial assessment, promotion of environment, ultimate management, there are manual elements to it. There are multiple panes of glass. There's a service provider involved. I have someone in-house who's part-time working on it. That complexity is not really fully addressed yet. And it may just be an ongoing sort of a thing. So it is a very attractive idea to have this single hyperscaler that I can host all the environments in. And then for a number of specialty, it might be 20% of my estate, a number of specialty or particular databases or applications where the cost of the fact that they are separated out is far outweighed by the convenience of management of this little, I'll say it again, silo. That persists to this day. Do we have more choices? The reason we have more choices, Mike, is because it is a lot cheaper and easier for LeaseWeb to stand up this inexpensive offer than ever before. That also means it is cheaper and easier for you to do it yourself in your data center, under your desk, in your closet, wherever else it is. So I still look at the management platforms, the operations platforms, which includes mobility and all that other sort of thing, and the runtime platforms as needing to continue to evolve before we really have this, start to approach this nirvana of I am going to have, I'm going to go into a web browser and with one or two panels, I'm going to be able to instantiate an environment, offer it up to the application manager or developer, and manage its life cycle cradle to grave. We're very far from that.
Mitch, I know you've been diving into this area in the last year or so pretty heavily. What's your take on what's going on with these alternative clouds?
Well, at least what kind of falls uniquely in the space of offering both dedicated hosting. Here's a physical servers, physical storage, etc. We're used to think it's just a hosting provider, and then they also have virtualized cloud-based offerings, which is part of what this VPC is, or VPS. Sorry, a different product, another vendor, but similar kind of product. So, it's not something that I think somebody's gonna say, "Oh, I'm in Amazon, so let's go over and use this web." I don't know that it's gonna drive people to use it because it's so much cheaper, because you're probably talking about more of a dedicated offering. But I think people that do need that, and they're I think they're Dutch-based, if I remember right, and they have a data center in Montreal in the US and in Europe, so there are some good places that would be great for some applications. So I think this is a cost savings, a little bit more flexibility. It's a feature, and I think it's a good thing. But it's a feature, so I don't over rotate on. It's not going to change the industry.
Tracy, what's your
No, but it's
what's
gonna. I'm sold as soon as I get off the call.
Well, I did just sign up. Why, when you said that, I signed up for commissions. So thank you.
Yeah, I mean, you have to understand where a startup comes from. We're looking at saving every single penny anywhere we can find. And at the same time, we're trying to host an open source community for the Continuous Delivery Foundation, who has lost sponsorship, and they don't support development environments for us anymore. So I have a ton of software developers who are trying to do development around Artilius, and they're all sitting at Raspberry Pis at home, right? So if we could use something like this to provide a central place for us to do a lot of the kinds of testing we need to do, integrations with tools like Circle CI and Jenkins, it would be so helpful. It would be so helpful. And even hosting our SaaS environment in some place that's going to be cheaper would be amazing. I mean, literally, we're looking at saving, if this is true, we could be saving about, I don't know, $297 a month, which is a crazy amount of money for a startup. So when it comes to the cloud, there's no such thing as one size fits all. And even in some organizations where they're doing maybe a monthly processing, something they have to do on the back end to do reconciliation of some sort, batch processing, I think this is a better alternative. And we're just coming to a place where we're going to have to acknowledge that every company's not going to just be Google, just be AWS. We are going to be using different services because it makes sense and it saves money. And so kudos to Leaseway to opening up some doors for younger startups that are not we're not a Bank of America that need an Amazon support.
Guy, do you think that the way that, I'm certain of this, but the big guys create these enterprise license agreements, and then what happens is the organization needs to hit a certain amount of threshold for for those discounts to kick in. And I think it discourages people from looking at the workloads to say which one makes the most sense to run where based on the total cost. So, do we need to kind of unpack some of those licensing agreements we have to think more about these workloads to have maybe, to your point, it is going to be a multi-cloud world, but how are we going to get there?
Yeah, I think the startups and the smaller companies, as well as the service providers, the smaller service providers, the regional ones, they're going to lead the way because they don't qualify. They don't have the budgets to get those kinds of enterprise level agreements. I'm a big, I talk a lot about how a lot of what appear to be small business activity actually takes place in the enterprise because, these are big companies, there's budgets all over the place, and people just go and start doing stuff. But I think that there are a lot of incentives, as you note, they're mostly business incentives, but somewhat cultural as well, away from using these smaller offers. Now, where are we? Or let's not call it a smaller offer. Let's call it a simpler offer. This is utterly simple. I think that's a lot what I took out from what Tracy said. It's a simpler decision because it's cheap. It's simpler because it's really, really straightforward. It's not coming with all of these bells and whistles and attachments and everything that you'd have to deal with a hyperscaler. This is one case where I don't think the enterprise or larger organizations that are going to qualify for those sorts of the binding contract that you're talking about, Mike, I don't think that this is a place where people want to really be in terms of finding and using environments where you're going to have a little bit less of that kind of innovation and trials and that sort of thing. It's really going to happen south of there, medium-sized companies, smaller SPs, and so forth. That's what's going to do it. That's what's going to do it. They are mature enough now. 10 years ago, they weren't nearly so mature, in terms of technological capabilities. Now it's just pervasive everywhere at every size of organization.
So, Mitch, if that's true, are we going to see the market segment more? And will the smaller, mid-sized companies kind of start looking outside the hyperscalers? What do you think?
We have had this already. Linode, that's now part of Akamai, was sort of a variation of LeaseWeb, more focused on developers with APIs and lots of tools for setting up Kubernetes and training materials. And in a way, LeaseWeb is focusing on, let's focus on the basics in terms of infrastructure for hardware and add some cloud services. We think the key ones you're going to need, and leave it at that. Don't over complexify. That's a word I made up. That's self-defining, by the way. Yes, don't over complexify. The offerings by okay, what is all this stuff, and what should I really be using? So I think what Tracy said for startup environment, for projects, I do, by the way, support dev test environments, have offerings around that. It may be just the right solution. Bank of America is not going to move all their stuff onto it tomorrow. That's probably not the provider of choice for them. Not that I know that. I don't have any inside information. But I think for many businesses, it's a great option.
I think what I'm trying to say is that at Bank of America is a great example. At Bank of America, there's lots of weird and wacky stuff going on, especially in dev, using platforms or, things that are not part of the marketplace that they have internally and all that sort of thing. So there's a lot of that activity that happens, both hardware, software, dev, the whole thing. But I think this category of cloud service is a lot less likely to be so because they are offered up, lots of ways to go and use stuff and do stuff via the hyperscalers at almost no cost to them.
All right. Well, guys, thanks for the insights. Everybody I talk to is doing something around cloud optimization, and I think that may also need to include looking at alternative sources for the right workload in the right place. Hey, guys, thanks for spending some time with us again, and good to see you all.
You bet. Always good, Mike.
Great to be here.
Absolutely.
Always learn something.
All right.
Me too.
Oh, you bet. Folks, thank you all for watching this latest episode, and please stay tuned. We have a ton of content on Techstrong TV today that's just going to be equally awesome. We'll see you next time.